Hey everyone! I'm not even sure how much time has passed, but here I am again with another illustration process video. The illustration itself isn't exactly new anymore. It's probably over a year old by now. And the video isn't new either. I finished the edit for this piece around half a year ago. And then just sat on it, trying to decide what kind of a message I actually wanted to pair it with. My first thought was that if I followed the standard route, thumbnails, refinement, approval, color, and so on, I'd mostly be repeating things I've already said in other videos, but maybe that feeling is misleading. Maybe the idea that I have nothing new to say is less of a fact and more of a mix of professional deformation and some cognitive bias, I don't know. This piece was a large interior illustration, which is not something I get to do all that often. That's just how commissions happen to land. On top of that, it had a lot of characters and a complex environment, so there was quite a lot to figure out here. When you're building an image like this, composition becomes absolutely critical. There are too many elements for the viewer's eye to just sort things out on its own. So while some simpler illustrations can survive with fewer thumbnails and less pre-production, a piece like this really can't. You need more research, more searching, and more groundwork before the final painting begins. I started with a number of line art thumbnails. Their main weakness, especially in client work, is that for someone who isn't an art director or visually trained, line can be pretty uninformative. It doesn't contain light, color, or atmosphere, so it may not communicate enough for the client to really imagine how the final image will feel. Black and white sketches do that much better. They can already reveal the composition and the main focal points clearly, but they also have an important drawback, especially with clients who aren't deeply familiar with visual development. They don't carry much emotional information. And color is one of our main tools for building mood, atmosphere, and the emotional charge of a scene. That's why when we're talking about narrative illustration, color becomes especially important from the client's perspective. So ideally, one of the most useful skills to build is the ability to create very simple, quick color sketches, even in rough, schematic form. And yes, I know that's one of the hardest skills to develop, learning to work fast in color, to generalize without losing the point, and to catch the core of composition while already thinking in color. That takes practice. But it's absolutely something you can grow into. When I'm building a black and white thumbnail blockout, I usually establish a few simple directional guides for myself. They act as anchors for the brain and for the eye, especially when it comes to space. Just a few guiding lines can explain the basic perspective of the frame. After that, the process has to become slower and more deliberate, because every brushstroke carries a lot of responsibility. Each mark either reinforces the sense of space or starts to break it. That becomes especially important when you're working very small and very fast, and still trying to explain the scene clearly. So, in a case like this, it's often better to slow down and measure 7 times before cutting once. And just as a personal preference, I'd avoid building thumbnails directly on top of a super dense perspective grid, because it will kind of slow you down and you will align objects too much. Once I had a set of black and white sketches and sent some of them to the client, the feedback came back and the path became much clearer. At that point, I already knew what the client liked, what needed adjustment, and where I could invest a bit more time and effort. That's where a color sketch becomes especially useful. It communicates the emotional side of the image much better, and it also lets me address the feedback gathered from the previous thumbnails. This new thumbnail can already be less schematic and slightly more developed, while still staying far from the final render. From there, one of the most important tasks in an illustration like this is the constant balancing of tonal masses. No matter how large or complicated your image is, if you zoom out, squint, and mentally strip away the details, it still has to resolve into a clear set of readable light and color shapes. That's what builds visual hierarchy. What the eye should notice first, what comes second, and what remains for the viewer to explore later, once the core idea has already landed. If that hierarchy isn't set up properly, the very impression of the image can collapse, and with it, the whole idea. That becomes especially difficult when the image is full of elements. You've got an interior, you've got a large cast of characters. Each character has their own design, and really every obstacle in the scene is also a design problem. Everything has to be understood. What you're drawing, how you're drawing it, what the characters are wearing, what they interact with, what these objects look like, what function they serve in the scene, and sometimes what role they play in the lore. All of these questions need answers, either before the painting starts or during the process. If you leave too many of them to chance, the result is simple. You suffer, and so does the quality of the work. You'll probably notice that throughout this process I often refine an area and then go back over it with a large brush, unifying the tones and sinking them back into a larger mass. That way, no small dark or bright accent inside that mass jumps out too aggressively. I'm constantly trying to maintain a clear hierarchy of what sits in front, what falls back, what acts as a focal area, where the contrast stays strong, and where contrast need to be softened and edges need to be lost. In an image like this, lost edges become one of your main expressive tools. They help you build the hierarchy of attention. If that part is weak, and you start polishing isolated areas without considering how they affect the image as a whole, the painting will eventually fall apart. It won't feel unified anymore, and its impact on the viewer will start to dissolve. At this stage, once I'm more focused on the image itself and the design starts becoming more specific, I build a more detailed perspective grid for myself. I switch it on and off whenever I need to check whether some elements started drifting. A lot of artists use plugins or manual transform tools to build a very dense perspective grid right from the start. They lay it over the canvas at low opacity and then block the whole scene directly on top of it. I think sometimes it can become more of an obstacle than real help. I'll explain. It just can be a little bit too restrictive in the early stages. When the grid is too rigid, there is a strong temptation to follow it too strictly. And then the space starts feeling artificial because everything in the scene ends up aligning in the same direction. Parallel, perpendicular, too clean, too ordinary. I think we all can admit that real spaces rarely look like that. Objects in real life usually don't stand in perfect alignment. Their angles drift a little, things are slightly off, and that imperfection is often what makes a space feel believable and organic. So, in order to keep that feeling, I prefer not to lock every object tightly to the perspective system. A few strong guides are usually enough to preserve the sense of space without making everything feel synthetic. This also naturally raises the question of using 3D for a scene like this. And for interior illustration, the value of 3D is actually hard to overstate. It can be incredibly useful, but it also comes with important caveats. The first thought many artists have when dealing with an interior is maybe it would be easier to model or at least block out the whole thing in 3D first. That way you can explore the camera angle, the shot, the perspective, and give yourself more flexibility before committing. And yes, on paper that sounds great. But the problem begins here. 3D is a fantastic tool for solving design that is already known. If you already understand what you want to build, 3D can help you implement it with clarity and accuracy. But when the design itself is still being searched for, I think 2D is actually much faster. Searching on paper is easier than searching in 3D, just because 3D is more technical and more exacting. If you start searching in 3D too early, you can lose a huge amount of time, especially if your 3D skills aren't yet very solid. Moving boxes around, figuring out shapes, wrestling with tools, all of that can easily take much longer than a few confident brushstrokes in Photoshop. It can drain your time, your energy, and eventually your focus. And the danger is that even after spending all of that effort, you may still end up with something that doesn't really solve the design problem. Another issue appears after you've already invested a lot of time into a 3D blockout. You may become too attached to the things you built, not necessarily because they're good for the composition, but because you spent time making them. And suddenly that fancy 3D table or decorative element you modeled starts feeling too precious to remove, even if compositionally it really has no business being there. That's one of the freedoms traditional sketching gives you. When you search through design directly in Photoshop, you avoid a lot of that attachment. And don't get me wrong, there will be plenty of examples where someone with very decent 3D skills will perform all these tasks, like searching for design in 3D and coming up with very impressive first blockouts on the go very easily. But if you're that guy, you already know that, so kudos to you. I just addressed this information for people less experienced around 3D. I know solving these issues in 2D is also not a walk in the park, right? Perspective is less automatic, atmosphere takes more intuition, and design decisions may feel less secure at first. But if you understand what each phase of the process is supposed to solve, you can move much faster. And that's especially true when it comes to characters. If you can suggest a crowd in 2D with just a few shapes and lines, doing the same in 3D is a completely different story. A crowd in 3D can't just be a vague gesture. It quickly turns into a forest of mannequins, each one needing placement, posing, and camera checks. You fly into the scene, adjust figures, fly back to the camera, realize half of them are hidden anyway, and repeat the process. It becomes tedious rather quickly. That's why the main challenge for 3D, especially for beginners, is staying focused and resisting unnecessary detail. It's very easy to lose hours on things that don't actually improve the image. So the situation becomes less obvious than it first seems. Yes, interior are deeply tied to perspective, and that naturally makes them appealing for 3D. But that doesn't mean 3D is automatically the right answer for every stage of the process. Does that mean 3D tools are useless here? Absolutely not. I'd strongly recommend practicing 3D and integrating it into your workflow. At first it will be clumsy and inefficient, and that's normal. Those early attempts will cost time, that's part of learning. But if you approach 3D integration thoughtfully, sooner or later you'll begin to understand which tasks really belong to 3D and which are better left entirely in 2D. Every artist eventually arrives at their own balance depending on their skills, preference, and strengths. Over time, you learn what each tool is good at, and you let it do the job. There is another reason I value 3D so much. It's one of the best hidden learning tools you can have. You can use it to simulate situations that are hard or pretty impossible to find references for. You can reconstruct lighting setups, material behaviors, and unusual spatial problems, sometimes almost one-to-one. I've used it countless times as a replacement for direct photo reference, and it has taught me a lot of things about light, material, and form. So if I had to describe what I think is one of the most effective pipelines, it would be this. First, develop a fast and cheap way to search for design in 2D. Learn to answer the big question with your sketches quickly to understand what is it that you're actually trying to make. Once that stage is solved and the design becomes clearer, move into 3D. At that point, 3D is no longer a search tool, it becomes an implementation tool. You already know what you want, so now 3D helps you build it accurately, test lighting, push the shot a bit further, maybe improve the angle, maybe discover something even more expressive. From there, you render the useful passes, make your masks, generate what helps, a depth pass, a clown pass, whatever supports the next stage. And then continue with the final rendering in 2D. For me personally, that feels like one of the most effective approaches in terms of both time and energy. But of course, it's still my perspective shaped by my own strengths and habits. At some point, I got tired of constantly correcting a few key structural elements that were important to the scene. Mainly the platform the mage is sitting on, and the planetary mechanism above his head with all those rings and orbital forms. Those shapes are made of a lot of intersecting ellipses at fairly tricky angles. They don't simply obey the usual horizon-based vanishing point logic, so instead of manually torturing myself with a complex construction over and over again, it made much more sense to build those elements in 3D and integrate them into the image. The process is straightforward. Take a screenshot of the current painting, camera match it in Blender, quickly block out the needed forms, throw on basic materials, and light them roughly in the same spirit as the scene. It doesn't need to be perfect, because most of it will still be painted over and adjusted by hand. The point is speed and clarity. That way you save a lot of time and end up with a couple of clean, well-constructed objects that also reinforce the sense of space in the whole scene. Entered another round of reworking the main character. He didn't sit well in the image, didn't read clearly enough, and didn't fully reflect some of the things the client wanted to see. So there were several redesign passes here. And for that, I used one of my favorite simple tricks. I cover the character I want to rework with a solid white shape, lower the opacity so the old version still shows through just a little, and then redraw the figure in line over the top in search of a better solution. Once I find it, I paint it back into the image. You may also notice that I use curves quite often throughout the process to rebalance tonal relationships. At this stage, most of the major elements are still separated across layers. I do try to avoid having an absurd number of them, simply because there is another caveat. Once you start using global adjustment layers over the whole painting, and I tend to use them a lot in projects like this one, Photoshop creates one of its classic little miseries. Color picking from the layers below the adjustment layer becomes unreliable and messes up your ability to pick colors. At that point, you have two options, neither of which is great. Either you flatten the image and continue painting on top of a merged version while masking the parts you still want to control, or go through the deeply annoying procedure of applying that same adjustment layer manually to layer after layer all the way down the stack. Sometimes it just has to be done, and it's awful every single time. I still don't know why Photoshop doesn't have a clean one-click way to bake an adjustment across the visible stack without turning it into a weird ritual. Or maybe I'm a dumbass and you will tell me in the comments how you actually can do this. I tried to find for an answer quite a while ago, I think, but never found any. I even made an action for that one, and it sort of helps, but it's still unreliable, especially when the layer structure gets complicated with all the folders and stuff. So one of the reasons why I keep the layer count relatively under control is exactly this. Complex illustrations often require a lot of tonal and masking adjustments. because getting all those light and shadow relationships right in one pass is, well, not unrealistic, but very, very difficult. If you need to rethink the focus structure or rework characters, you'll almost certainly need masks, curves, and other correction tools. One thing I've noticed over time, and I think this came from experience with more complex images, is that you should remember that most of the things you paint are under your control. You shouldn't become their servant. A good example here is the figure on the left side in the background. I changed that character into a person standing with their back to us in a white cloak, specifically to make the dramatic moment of the surprised male character in front, spilling wine onto the floor, more visible and readable. You actually make decisions like this all the time in illustration. You alter forms, silhouettes, and placement to make certain moment land. The important part, though, is to do it without destroying the overall hierarchy of the image or creating too many tiny competing focal points in places that shouldn't steal attention. When I rework or repaint characters inside a scene like this, I try to make at least some of them feel more natural and alive. I avoid overly mechanical head turns and rigid body angles. I want the poses to feel more organic, as if the characters have actually lived inside the moment for a second. To get there, either use reference or pose it out yourself. Try to step into the character mentally and act the moment out in your own head. For me, that tends to make the figures more convincing and helps the whole image break down into small, subtle side stories. Those little stories may not be obvious at first glance, but on the second or third read, they add life and richness to the painting. Another trick I use sometimes is to keep a copy of the current image on a separate layer, scaled down, while I redraw large groups of characters. The reason is simple: the earlier version of those characters might already contain colors that work. It just becomes a ready-made palette for repainting. That way I don't have to keep reinventing colors that were already chosen successfully. I can just pick from the previous version while redrawing the new one. As for VFX in the scene, I quite often rely on photobashing for things like fire, lighting, energy effects, or in this case, elements of a cosmic map or celestial space. But photobashing alone is rarely enough. If you lean entirely on found imagery, that can become very obvious, and depending on your painting style, those elements may stick out badly from the rest of the work. So what I usually do is treat Photobash as a support tool rather than a complete solution. I paint over the more visible parts by hand or paint some of them from scratch entirely, using photographic material mainly to inject useful details where doing everything manually would be too time-consuming. Also, when you've been working on a big project like this for a long time, it can be surprisingly hard to sit down on a new day and immediately know what to tackle first. That's why it helps to either leave yourself notes at the end of the session or spend a few minutes at the beginning of the next one just looking. Look at the piece with fresh eyes. Ask what feels wrong, what feels unfinished, what keeps pulling your attention for the wrong reasons. In other words, leave little art direction notes for your future self. That's useful because the next day your eye is fresher, you may spot issues that felt invisible the night before. Having even a rough plan before jumping in helps a lot, because sitting down cold in front of a large complicated painting can drain a ridiculous amount of both energy and motivation. And by this point, we're already getting into the final character polish. Probably the biggest challenge with the central figure on the platform was building the lighting so it supported the idea that the lower part of his body is lit by the stronger accent light coming from the window, while that light gradually fades out as it moves up towards the torso and head, where the colored VFX light from the magic takes over much more strongly. Painting that transition correctly, the vertical shift from one lighting logic to another, was one of the main challenges here, I think. Another important thing to keep an eye on is color temperature. After a while, when you work with local color long enough, you stop thinking primarily in terms of red, blue, green, or purple. You start thinking more in terms of warmer or cooler. You still understand the local color of the object, of course, but once the base is set, a lot of the real problem solving becomes about temperature. If the color isn't sitting in the environment properly, if something feels dirty or disconnected from the surrounding light, very often the issue is temperature. And in my experience, temperature often gets solved not only by shifting hue, but very strongly through saturation. Through how much chroma the color still carries, and how much it moves towards gray. As the influence of another light source pushes the color away from its local value, the things often happen together. Saturation drops, and the hue shifts away from that original local color. Of course, everything becomes more complicated when multiple colored light sources are involved. If a red object is hit by blue or green light from one side or something warmer from another, then the standard recipes stop being useful very quickly. And again, this is where 3D can help. A simple test scene with a sphere on a white plane and two different lights can answer a surprising number of questions. I do that quite often, actually. At this point, I think extra commentary on this painting would probably just become redundant. I've also been thinking about shifting the format of video like this a bit. Maybe using the painting footage more as a backdrop for broader topics instead of focusing so heavily on the exact technical steps of the image itself. If that sounds interesting to you, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts in the comments. Because realistically, after a few more videos like that, many of the illustration-specific topics I don't want to repeat from piece to piece will already be covered well enough, I think. And I'd rather avoid turning this channel into a parade of samey, low-substance videos where I sound like a scratched vinyl record. Still, after thinking it through, I did manage to find a number of things in this piece that I haven't really talked about in depth in previous videos, and I hoped you enjoyed this one. And hopefully the next video won't arrive in another 6 months. One more thing. Partially to motivate myself to make more content, and partially to put a bit more emphasis on personal work and development of the channel, maybe even a small community around it, I opened a Discord server. Anyone can join. Right now it's very informal and lightly moderated simply because there aren't many people there yet. But ideally I'd love for it to become a small cozy place for like-minded people. Somewhere to share progress, ask questions, discuss work, exchange experience, and do the usual things people do on Discord servers. I've checked out a number of art servers over time, and for whatever reason, I never really found one that felt quite right to me. So maybe with a bit of luck, I can build that kind of place for myself and others. All the links you need are in the video description. That's it for now. Good luck and see you later.